Now, it's my honor to introduce two remarkable women whose strength has inspired me, and I think will inspire you today as well. Jennifer Pinckney has spent more than 20 years as a librarian. She's the wife of the late Reverend Senator Clementa C. Pinckney, who was tragically killed during a Bible study at the Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston on June 17, 2015. She's also the proud mother of two daughters, Eliana and Malana, and the founder of the Clementa C. Pinckney Foundation, which continues her husband's mission to improve the quality of life for all South Carolinians. Malana Pinckney is now 16 and a senior in high school. She's in her second year as both dance captain and color guard captain. She's played the cello for over 10 years now and stays active in clubs, academic societies, and volunteer work. She's an amazing young woman, and she's preparing now for college. She has dreams of becoming a sports psychologist, and she's already doing so much more. So thank you again, Jennifer and Malana Pinckney. Please join me in welcoming them to the front.
So it's definitely a pleasure being here. Thank you, Alicia, and everyone for the invite. First thing I want to think about is Joshua 1:9, be strong and of good courage. And, you know, in that scripture, Joshua led the children and for 40 years. And, you know, I think about the storms that he might have gone through or they might have gone through. You know, when you have those storms, you have to have the faith. You have to be strong and of good courage. I mean, life and the way we see things, they're not just going to go our way. Things are going to change. Things are going to happen. You know, when we start off in life, we look at and say, oh, these are the things that I want to do. And I said the same thing. These are things that I want to do. These are places I want to go. But God had a different plan for me. And it was up to me to embrace it. When we deal with storms, sometimes your storm can be raging. You know, sometimes we look at it like, well, why did this happen to me? Why did that happen to me? We look at, you know, you can have storms of abandonment or a storm of anxiety, a storm of depression. There's so many different storms, so many different things that people go through. And we must rise above those storms. And when I think of rising above the storms, I want to think of flying an airplane or being on an airplane. How many of you have ever flown before? Okay, many of us have. And when we fly, the first thing, we have to make adjustments. We have to think about getting to the airport and the delays, things that happen. And just like in life, things happen. You know, when we get to the airport, we're thinking, okay, I'm ready to get on that airplane and I'm ready to take off to get to my destination. And then all of a sudden they can't come on the intercom and say, this flight has been delayed. So what do? Get mad, of course. We're ready to go. We're ready to get to wherever we're going. But then they finally come around and they tell us that we can start boarding the flight. So in life, we deal with delays. We deal with problems. And just like once we get on that airplane, what do we then do? We start praying. Lord, please let me get to my destination safely. Please let everything be all right. But guess what? Not only are you praying and putting your trust and faith in God, but guess who else you're putting your trust and faith in? The pilot, someone you don't know. You don't know what kind of morning or day they had before they got on that airplane. And so you're putting your trust and faith in a person to get you from point A to point B. And every time, and I don't know if Malana has ever noticed this, but every time we have to board a plane, I'm usually ahead of both my girls, or lately it's just been Malana, and I'm usually walking ahead of her. And right before I step on that plane, I touch the outside of the plane. And I say a quick prayer, and I'm like, Lord, be with us. Let us get to our destination safely, amen. And I will step on the plane. And when I get ready to get off the plane, usually the pilot is standing there, and I'm like, thank you. Thank you for a safe flight. So once we're on our plane and we put our faith in, like I said, in God, and we were prayerful and hoping that the pilot gets us there, in life, things aren't going to run smoothly. And just like that airplane, you're going to feel some turbulence when you take off, once you start rising up. And that turbulence could be different changes, different things that may happen in your life, the bumps in the road, but it's how you deal with it. How we deal with the problems and the turbulences that is in our life that we have. When we hit those storms right before we rise above the clouds, it could be, we're so mad about different things and so forth. It could be, you just feel like a monkey wrench is being thrown at you. You may say that you feel that your life has shattered. Your hope is gone. And I felt that way on June 17, 2015. When I woke up that morning, it was a good morning. And you never know how your day is going to end. We never know. We know how we get up. We thank God for waking us up each morning. But you don't know what you're going to deal with, what you're going to endure that day or any day. And that particular day, I spoke to my husband several times, texting. And, he had things to do. He had a meeting to go to. He had Bible study to go to. He had things to do. He was busy. And one thing that I remember, he was like, we were in Columbia, and he was like, I have to go to Charleston. And for some reason, I was very persistent that day. Like, oh, I'll go with you. I'll be there. I'm going with you. I'm going with you. And he was like, well, I don't know if I'll be able to pick you up and so forth. But for some reason, he called me back and he said, darling, I'll be there to get you. So meanwhile, my oldest daughter, Eliana, who also took dance and has been dancing since age 3, I went to pick her up. But before I left the house, my mom was there, and so was Malana, who was much shorter than what she is now. And Malana said, I want to go with you and Daddy. And I said, okay, that's fine. So then I left her to go pick up her sister so that I can get her home and get everything settled, just like any other day. And I picked her up and I told her, I said, Daddy and I were going to Charleston. Daddy has a meeting, Daddy has Bible study. And I asked her if she wanted to go. And at the time, Eliana was 11, Malana was 6. And Malana, of course, Malana looks at me and she says, is Malana going? And I said, yes, your sister's going. And she said, well, I'm going to stay home with Grandma. And I said, okay. So anyway, on our trip, once we left the house and on our trip to Charleston, Malana asked her father something that she asked him all the time. Daddy, when you're done, can we stop by McDonald's on the way back and we get some ice cream? And he quickly looked at her while he was driving, and he said, sure, darling, we'll get some ice cream. Once we got to the church and business meeting happened, which led up to the Bible study, I was in the pastor's study along with Malana. Now, Malana was a very rambunctious child, very rambunctious. And so I knew that Malana was not going to sit through a business meeting, a church business meeting, and Malana was not going to sit through Bible study. So I came prepared. I had a bag of snacks, and we sat in Clemente's study, the pastor's study. And I'm not going to go through some of the things that she may want to say, but I will say this. While we were sitting in there, I was doing some library work. She was occupied with some other things, and I let her explain what she might have been doing. And right before the Bible study actually started, Clemente walked through his office. We said a few things. He said, love you, darling. I said, love you, and he walked into that Bible study. And that was the last time I saw my husband alive. While sitting there in his office for a little while, all of a sudden, I started hearing pop, pop, pop. And I scared you, didn't I? You jumped. I saw some of you jump. Well, that's what I did. I jumped. And I ran to the door. And I was just about to open that door. And something said, hold up. Someone's shooting. Who in the world could be shooting? And I didn't quite say it like that. But I said, who in the world could be shooting in a church? Quickly locked the door, and I ran back through that pastor's study so fast, I snatched Malana up like she was a rag doll. Got her in the next room, which was the secretary's office. Shoved her under a desk. 6 years old. And all we could hear is gun fire, shots. Shot after shot after shot, and I believe it was like 80-something shots. 80-something gunshots were heard for 9 people. 9 people died that day. And I heard the shooter say, right before he walked out the door, I had to do this. I heard before he said that someone was trying to get out the church, and he shot that person right outside that secretary's door. And while I was sitting under the desk with Malana, after I had shoved her under that desk, I told Malana, I whispered to her. First, I told her, you have to be quiet. Hush. Silence. Be quiet. I told Malana that, tell your sister that I love her, and I love you as well. But for some strange, crazy reason, I was going to make a run for it. Because right outside that secretary's office is the outside door. And I was going to run outside that door, run across that little hallway, run outside the secretary's door, cross that little hallway to the outside. Because I knew that door would lock behind me, so Malana would be safe. And as soon as myself, was going to make that move, God had another plan for me. Bullets came through that wall, and I heard the choo, and I leaped under that desk so fast, and underneath that desk Malana asked me, is Daddy gonna die? 6 years old. And I put my hand over her mouth because I told her she has to be quiet. Shh. Put my hand over her mouth. And she in turn put her hand over my mouth. And we sat like that as we heard the shots. Well, once he left, you know, a lot of us, our phones are hooked to us. You know, we're always holding our phones or in our pockets and so forth. I had left my cell phone in the pastor's study. And when I heard the chime on the outside door, I heard that little chime, I said to myself, he must be gone. But before I heard that chime, he tried to get into the secretary's office. I heard him trying to unlock the door. She turned it. My blood went cold because I knew that if he'd gotten in there, we were gone. We wouldn't be here today. And one other thing, too, and I thank Malana for this all the time and every single time that I speak. But I thank Malana for my life. Because if Malana had not decided to go with her father and I to Charleston, I would have been sitting right beside Clemente. And I wouldn't be here today. But because she wanted to go is why I'm sitting here in front of you right now. Because he could not get that door open is why Malana and I are sitting here right now. Because Eliana, 11 years old, think about when you were 11 years old. It was hard enough for me to tell her that her father is dead. But can you imagine at 11 years old to find out that you've just lost your whole family? Your mother, your father, your sister, they're all gone. Once I heard the first responders come into the church. I had my phone by that time, and I called 911, and I heard the responders coming in. I told the person on the phone, I'm like, okay, they're here. We can leave. She said, do not leave that spot. And I didn't understand why. But then I later realized that if I would have grabbed Malana and walked out that door, the policemen probably would have shot us because they didn't know fully what all was going on and what all was happening. But while we were under the desk, I heard them say about the person that was shot right outside the door. Hey, man, he's still alive. Stay with us. Stay with us. Get the gurney in here. We got to get this one to the hospital. Well, of course, later on, we found out that that person passed. But then I heard the first responders, once they had gotten him out of there and gotten that particular member to the hospital, I heard the first responders say, bring in a body bag. And then I heard the first responders say, bring in several body bags. Once they broke through the pastor's study door, because there were two doors. There was a door that led to the secretary's office and a door that led straight into where the Bible study was. So once they broke into that door, I heard them clear. The bathroom was clear. Clear. The closet was clear. And then they opened the door between the pastor's study and the secretary's office. And I'm grateful because God was, of course, with us, with me, with Malana, because when they opened that door, guns were drawn directly at us. But I had Malana positioned under that desk so that she never saw any of it. We got Malana out of the church, and I'll let her explain how she got out of the church. And then it was my turn to leave the church. And I did not walk through the bodies, but the area that was right outside that door, the gentleman that had gotten shot several times, I had to leap over pools of blood. Pools of blood on the floor, blood was splattered on the walls, blood was splattered everywhere. Something that I'll never forget for the rest of my life. And then to fast forward to when they moved us to the embassy suite down the street, and the church members started pouring in, and the family members started pouring in. And I had made some phone calls, and then some of my family started coming. And I had called to let someone get to my house, to get to my mom and to Eliana, to let them know, you need to get to Charleston ASAP. Fast forward a little bit more, the coroner, because mind you, we were there in the wee hours of the morning, the coroner finally called me and my family to come into a small room. And I kind of knew, but didn't want to know. And family members were already in there. I told my mom, you stand outside the door with Eliana Malana. I did not want them in that room. I walked in, and the coroner told me to have a seat. And I said, no, thank you. Because I knew if I sat down, she was going to tell me some bad news. And I didn't want to hear any bad news. I already been through enough. I didn't want to hear anything else. And she asked me to please sit down. Family members all around. And of course, when she did, she informed me that Clemente was one of the ones that was shot and killed. So how do I then tell a 6-year-old, an 11-year-old, that the father they adored is no longer with us? The Lord gave me the strength to do that. And since that time, I continued trying my best to keep the girls, continue doing what they were doing before they lost their father. Dance was their thing. And I remember that morning, which we had just gotten home, a few hours later, Eliana was going to a dance, something that they had at dance, and intensive, a dance intensive. And I went in her room, Malana was asleep, and I went into her room and I said, she sat up in the bed and I said, Eliana, do you want to go to dance? But I understand if you don't want to go, because at that point in time, I was just ready to sit there and hold my baby, and we together, we can just cry it out. And she looked at me and she said, yes, Mom, I want to go to dance. She said, Mama, I don't have to cry because I know my daddy is right here with me right now. And I immediately, whatever tears that I was ready to let fall, I sucked them back up, because I was not going to let her see me break down. I was not going to let her see me cry. And I said, then go ahead and get up, get ready, and I'm going to take you to dance. And that's exactly what we did. Life continued. Even though the storm was bad, the storm was horrible, life continued. And I had to continue putting one foot in front of the other one, because I had 2 girls to raise. And then when I felt like I needed to cry, it was time to take a shower. Because I'd always got, those girls probably said, I know my mama's clean, but she is staying in that shower a whole lot. And I did, because I would go in the shower and I would cry and cry and cry. And I'd pray and I'd ask the Lord, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And then I get out the shower, get myself together, and I let my girls see that we got this. We got this. God's got us, and we've got this. And now I'm going to turn it over to the little rambunctious one, Malana.
Hello, everybody. I know y'all have heard this story, and there's not much for me to add, but I do kind of have a slightly different viewpoint of it. So I'm not going to go as far into detail as she did, but I will kind of touch on a couple parts that she wanted me to touch on. So kind of going to the part where we're already in the study, and my mom brought this bag of snacks. I was eating fruit snacks and watching the Thundermans. If you were a kid that liked watching shows, you know that Thundermans was like top peak shows. But I was watching the Thundermans, and all of a sudden, like she said, we heard these very long popping sounds, and I did not know what it was at the time. My mom, she, and a couple other things she'll say, thought it was a generator, but then after a while, when my mom snatched me up and threw me under the desk, I knew something just wasn't right. And as a child, we know that a lot of adults try to mask certain things from us to try to keep us staying youthful. So my mom wasn't really telling me what was going on. So I was just sitting there like, okay. And she was like, be quiet. And I was like, okay. So I was sitting there under the desk, nothing, not a care in the world. And then I looked in my mom's eyes, and I can tell it was just straight fear. And then when I see my mom, the person who has always been strong for me, have fear in her eyes, I know that there is something going on that is bigger than both of us, where I really needed to listen to what she was saying. So the whole time under the desk, just completely quiet. And like my mom says, I was a very rambunctious child. She's being very modest about it, but I was a very rambunctious child. So me being quiet at that time was something that was kind of hard for me to do, but I knew that I had to kind of lock in and do that. And once the police officers came and broke through the door and was looking at us with the flashlights and their guns drawn at us, were asking us, are you guys okay? Did anybody come in here? And after we've already been through that, they picked me up, and one of the officers said, we're gonna play a game. And they picked me up and they said, put your head in my shoulder, close your eyes for as long as you can, and don't open them until I tell you to. So I said, okay. As a child, loved playing games. So she picked me up. I had my head on her shoulder, and she pressed my head down. And she said, I'm going to walk out this door, and for anything you do, don't open your eyes. So that's exactly what I did. And I closed my eyes, and I went into her outside, and I didn't open them, and she didn't allow me to open my eyes until we were all the way into the embassy suites across the street. And as we got into the embassy suites, like I said earlier, as kids, they want us to stay youthful, and they don't really inform us on everything that's going on. So I'm in a room with my sister and my grandma, and we're eating this trail mix that wasn't really tasty, but to say that it was 3 a.m., it was fulfilling me to what I needed. And they called my mom to another room. And when they did that, it confused me because we were all together, we were all praying, we were with family, and it was kind of a moment of kind of peace, you know, the kind of like the peace before the storm, the calm before knowing what is going to be happening next. And as a child, I didn't really know the anticipation that my mom was holding in that moment, knowing that the love of her life could be gone, my father could be gone. But because of the brave face that she put on, none of that stress was ever on me. So once she left and they told her that my father had passed, my mom had brought me and my sister into a room with my grandmother. And she brought us in front of her, and she held both of our hands and told us that our father had passed. Now, being 6 years old, that doesn't really register in your mind. Your father, the person that you've been looking up your whole entire life is gone forever. That is something that doesn't really register. So at the time, I wasn't really I was still kind of in that la-la land kind of youthful feel. The whole way home, even a couple weeks after my father's death, it didn't really register to me that I would never have a father again. I'm never gonna have anybody to walk me down the aisle. I won't have anybody to take pictures with on prom when I had prom this last year. I never have those father-daughter moments that every child should have. And that's something that did not register with me at the time. And that's something I had to kind of grow forth with and kind of come to terms with. But that's also going to lead me to my next point. You can't let things like this change the trajectory of your life forever for the worse. You have to change that pain. You have to take that hurt, that's something that changed me forever, and you have to change that into something good. You can't just let that kind of swell on you forever, because I know if I did, I'm not sure. Well, my mom, if she didn't stay strong, I'm not sure where I would be today, and if I didn't stay strong with her, I'm not sure where we would be. So that's it, just to give you guys another way of the story.
Now, one thing I wanted to share, a story that I heard years ago, and I'm going to change it up just a little bit. She has her driver's license now, and and so just to kind of say this last piece to kind of sum everything up or finalize everything, Malana's driving, and all of a sudden it starts storming. So Malana looks at me, and I'm like, okay, it's starting to rain. Okay, keep driving. And so she continued driving, and the rain gets harder. And I look at Malana, I'm like, can you see? She's like, yes, I can see. Keep driving. Then the bottom falls out. The storm starts raging. Malana gets scared. And I say, she looks at me and she's like, Mama? And I'm like, can you see? And she says, yes, I can see. I said, well, keep driving. Until finally we see the sunlight. The rain has stopped. And I say to Malana, you remember all those cars that you passed back there? And she says, yes. I said, they're still in the storm. God's got you. And there's no storm bigger than God. Thank you.